Greetings, millionaires, multimillionaires, and future millionaires. I'm Lane Beene, a 28-year retired lieutenant colonel, a former F-16 pilot, and a successful real estate investor. During the past 15 years, I side hustled one single-family house into a multi-million-dollar apartment portfolio with almost 700 units and awards that included Fort Worth Property of the Year and National Multifamily Housing Council Renovation of the Year. I achieved this while working full-time for the U.S. Air Force, deployed 5 times to the Middle East, and being a dedicated father and husband. My goal is to share with you what I learned to help you become a better investor and a better millionaire. The subject of today's episode is the final segment in a 3-part series that explains the investment decision process. During the first episode, I introduced this process and discussed the importance of being deliberate and sequential with each step. I call this process the 4 doors to becoming a millionaire because it's critical to consistent, successful investment decisions. The second podcast in this series was a more detailed discussion of Door 1 and Door 2, and today's podcast continues where we left off with a discussion of the final 2 points, Door 3 and Door 4. Before we jump into the cockpit, let's fly over the process again at 20,000 feet as a review. Door number 1, define your investment strategy. Are you investing for the purposes of growth or income? How long is your investment period? What are your risk tolerances? The answers to these and similar questions help you define your strategy and ensure your goals are aligned with the investment plan and business plan. The action step for this point was define your goal or define your financial requirements and write down your investment strategy. Because when you're clear about your strategy and satisfied it meets your goals, then you're ready to go to step 2, which is identify the market. Now, we've all heard the concept of location, and that principle certainly holds true. But practically, how do you find the best markets? Well, the way I've been successful in that area is start from big and then work small. Evaluate the regional trends, things like in-migration or population changes, job growth, and continue to niche down to smaller market data like occupancy and rental growth rates. And then finally, evaluate the submarket information like what are the competitive properties like, what's the neighborhood demand like. The action step for this point was to identify an area and a market that you're interested in and then find and source that data that we discussed. Understanding the market relative to your Door 1 investment strategy opens up door number 3. Select your team and then on to Door 4, identify a property, which is the topic of today's podcast. So, put on your headsets and let's talk about the final 2 steps of the investment decision process. Step 3, Door 3, identify your investment team and select the critical members. At first glance, this seems like the easiest step and a process that can be delayed. But this is a misunderstanding and mindset that has to be clarified. Lane's lesson learned from single-family investing was I was a do-it-yourself, a DIY. I started investing in single-family properties on my own because I had a limited amount of capital and a limited knowledge base. I did everything myself. I sourced deals, I evaluated properties, I inspected homes, I made offers, I accomplished repairs. While this may work on a small scale for single-family investments, it doesn't work on any scale for multifamily investments. It took me over a year of unsuccessful effort to recognize my error and change my mindset. To be a successful investor, you must build a great team. Robert Kiyosaki says, poor people look for a job, rich people build networks. That principle is certainly true. So the question becomes, who do you need on your team and where do you find them? Well, I associate the real estate investment team to the concept of a dartboard. The most valuable point on the board is the bullseye. This position represents your core team members, the ones you speak with weekly and have daily responsibilities. Examples of these core team members are your business partners, your property management, and your operational staff. The middle circle of your dartboard is your second ring members of your team. These teammates are part of the routine business that occur monthly And an example of these team members are your banker, your CPA, your bookkeeper, or specific tradesmen that operate on your property, like plumbers or electricians. The outer circle of your dartboard represents the third team or the third members of your team. These teammates serve valuable roles, but not on a routine basis. They're called upon as needed to accomplish specific tasks. For an example, real estate agents, tax consultants, mortgage brokers, other business advisors, or tradesmen like foundation, flooring, or appliances. I've always learned this lesson, and I continually learn it, and it's a mistake that I often make, is when you work with amateurs, they cost you money. When you work with professionals, they make you money. So I can't emphasize enough the importance of team. Well, now that we know who we're going to get on the team, the next question is, how do we find them? Well, several methods I've had success finding good teammates. One is attend real estate meetings and seminars and ask for referrals. Talk to the panel guests. Get to know these experts and follow their enterprise. Ask for their best practices and who is the market leader. Ask for or find out their name and connect with them via email or LinkedIn. Realize the people on these panels or the people presenting seminars want to be industry leaders, and they are thought leaders in their space, and they're doing what they're doing to gain influence. Your role to building a good team is learning how to prioritize and build high-value relationships with these professionals. That's important because that is a fast ticket to success. In other words, find somebody that's already been successful and ask them for referrals. Now, if you're not the general partner or you don't have direct responsibility for building this team, is building team or is this concept even critical to you? And the answer is absolutely. Because even though you're not directly responsible, it is in your need to know what teams or what members of your team are going to be on your investment staff. So make sure that you ask the general partner or ask your business partners to explain these relationships that he has with his team. What is their experience? What is the relevancy and the currency of their successes? And go into that detail. If the answers come back hollow or blank, that's a bad sign, meaning there is no team or hasn't been enough thought put into that. The action steps for building your team are these. Sign up as soon as you can at the next real estate investment club or seminars that are available. Old Capital has one coming up. Certainly sign up for them. Follow industry experts. Write down the name of the panel guest. Try to connect with them via LinkedIn. Let them know you're interested in following them. That brings us to the final door in our 4 doors to becoming a millionaire. The 4th door is property. This aspect of investing is probably the most commonly discussed and commonly talked. It's often, incorrectly in my opinion, placed before all the other criteria, and I think that's not the right way. This should be the final step to making a good investment decision, and it should only be evaluated after you're satisfied about your strategy, the correct market, with a team in place to execute with this property. The property selection. This is a big topic that could easily fill a textbook. The topics and things that fall under this category include the size of the property, the unit mix, the physical condition, the age of construction, the layout, and it goes on and on. There is a lot to discuss. But let's get to the main point, and that main point boils down to reaching our financial goals. That is comprised of the financial durability of the income stream. So we need to make sure when we get to evaluating the property that our financial review is at the highest level. That includes looking at the financial documents. That often will include the financial documents for the history and then the pro forma, or the property will perform. So let's talk about each of these in a little bit more detail and things that I've learned to look for that help me reveal the strength of this product or strength of this property and the weakness of this property. The financial documents, what will you receive? Generally, when you're looking to evaluate a property, the broker or the seller or the lender will be able to provide financial documents that often include the rent roll and the profit and loss statements. Those are probably the two fundamentals, and there may be some other things, but those are necessary. Those are current financial reports that indicate the health and operational efficiency. Realize there's a big variance between the professionalism, the completeness, and the accuracy of those. And it is in your responsibility and your due diligence to validate that information is accurate and information that it is also current. The rent roll is the very first thing we'll talk about, and that is a list of all the units that are available for rent. Who is currently occupying those units? What is the start time of their lease? What is the expiration point? And the amount that they've paid in rent. It's really important that you validate, you look at those things to make sure that they're correct, and make sure, because the rent defines the income of the property, and that's the top line figure that you're going to use to perform, or you're going to use to create your financial model for this property. So make sure that you validate that and just don't accept it as 100% accurate. In addition to your rent rolls, you should also receive a profit and loss statement. And this statement is generally a line-by-line item of category, income, and expenses that the property has received over the last year, 6 months, or 90 days. It's important to look at the period that this covers, and also important to look at the accuracy of each item. Oftentimes, what you'll see is this period will cover a 1-year period in expenses, but there may be some variance there where there's a shorter period of income, or there's a longer period. That's called the T12, T6, T90, T30. You hear it referred to in different ways. And really what that means is the trailing 12 months, the trailing 6 months, 90-day trailing, 30-day trailing. And that's important because sometimes there may be trends that are covered up or trends that are not as illustrative as if you shorten the period. So just make sure that you understand what the assumptions are going into your profit and loss statement. The focus of the profit and loss, again, is to evaluate how the property is operating financially and point out where there are leaks, maybe where there's some inefficiencies, and ask the question, why? What numbers or figures stand out as extraordinary? Okay, an example may be rent losses higher than expected, or rent losses increase in any one period. That's not necessarily a disqualifying factor. It's just something that warrants closer evaluation. Ask more questions. Ask to see that unit. Ask more, or get the advice from your property manager. And how do you know what are extraordinary expenses, or how do you know what is out of line if this is maybe one of your first deals that you're evaluating? And that's why you lean back on your team of real estate professionals. You may ask your real estate agent. You may ask other investors, ask your lenders, ask the property manager to review the P&L, review the rent roll, and review your pro forma. As an example, recently at one of the properties that I have, we had some trees fall due to some storm damage, which elevated the landscaping expenses over a 2-month period. So without that background of story, you would think, well, the landscaping expenses are out of control. Maybe there's a problem or inefficiency here that I could come in and satisfy. But the real story behind that was, hey, we just had some wind damage that required a higher expense. That may lead you to some incorrect analysis or incorrect assumptions. Another part of the financial documents is the investment pro forma. In other words, how will the property perform going forward? This is the financial model that you're using to build rate of return, cash on cash return, internal rate of return. All of these items are going to be established on the pro forma and some basic financial assumptions that you'll need to make. What are those financial assumptions? Okay, how much rent can be increased? What are the expenses that can be controlled or minimized? What type of capital expenditures or improvements will I be making on the property? These are all items that in reverse you can see begin at the strategy, continue to the market, work through the team, and now we're down to this last step of evaluating the property. So these all have to be harmonious across those 4 doors to get to this final step and evaluate your pro forma and evaluate your financial market. But remember, these assumptions, increasing rent, controlling expenses, upgrades result in this much improvement in revenue, have to be substantiated with as much evidence as possible. For an example of what I learned. My very first property was the Heights over in Fort Worth. When we purchased the property, the single family or the single bedroom units were renting at $650. But I felt like if I could improve the units, I would be able to increase rents to $1,000 per unit. Why did I make that assumption, and was that a fair assumption to make? I based that assumption on the rent per unit on the adjacent property 100 yards from the Heights. That property was achieving $950 on a one-bedroom unit. And I knew that if we could meet their standard of upgrade, we would be able to get at least $1,000. That was one of the assumptions that I made on our Heights pro forma, and it was based upon evidence in the market. This is an important idea, and I really want to stress to you, as you evaluate a property, either you're syndicating it or you're having the general partnership, or someone brings you, make sure that you understand what the assumptions are, especially understanding the strategy. This is a value add strategy. We're operating in a market that is regentrifying. We have a team in place that intends to replace 50% of the tenants. You can see how these things begin to harmonize to the final steps of we're going to be able to increase rents if we improve the property. So I've got a couple of assumptions there that I said we're going to have a value add. We're going to be able to control or increase income. We're going to be able to control expenses. And this is an important point, that you understand what these assumptions are so that you can evaluate the correct risk of the property. In other words, if I have 3 assumptions that I have to increase rents by 10%, I have to turn over 30% of my current tenant base, and I have to control some other factor, and 2 of those 3 assumptions have to be accurate for me to reach my pro forma, well, that indicates that that's a pretty high risk pro forma, and I may need to ask more questions. Still may be completely a qualified investment. I just need to ask more questions. That brings me to one of the principles that I just say you have to be able to stand firm on, and that's being a disciplined investor. That discipline means that you have an established set of criteria, an established set of investment fundamentals that you don't bend and you don't change. And what I mean by that is you're looking for a property of this size, you're looking for an internal rate of return or certain metrics that are important to you according to your strategy in this marketplace and your team can execute on. Because oftentimes, even though there is no perfect property, you'll be anxious to get into a property purchase and overlook some of these critical criteria that are established in your investment fundamentals. So, if you take nothing other than this, be a disciplined investor and establish clear criteria that you're willing to walk away from. If that criteria is not satisfied, some of the best investments are the ones that you don't make. So please take that into account. That concludes the points on the property decisions. And as a recap of what we've talked about this last 3 episodes, the most important thing that I want to emphasize to you is be a disciplined, sequential, and logical investment process. The way Lane does that, and what I've learned, is it starts with your strategy. Figure out what type of strategy you have. From that, define where your market and where you're going to hunt for that type of property, that type of investment opportunity, that strategy can be implemented. Then put the right team in place. A team on site, a team of support, a team of assistants that can go in, execute your strategy in that market with these team members. And then finally, prospect for that investment property. When you find that investment property, don't just accept the fact that this is the right fit, but go in and validate each of those facts to the best of your ability and to the utmost possibility. Make sure that you evidence all of your assumptions to factual, market-based research and study. If you define your process in that way, and you can logically go through each of those steps, your investment decision is going to be solid. That's going to lead you to more consistent, more successful investments, and it's going to help you become a better millionaire. I'm Lane Beene. You can reach me at lane.beene@pilot-legacy.com, and I hope to see you on the investment cycle.